It was hard to tell how long they all stood in the driveway simply grateful to be together. And even harder to tell how much longer they did the same once inside. Eventually, when it seemed all tear ducts had run dry, they found themselves sitting quietly around the kitchen table. Vanessa was the first to speak, staggering to her feet in realization. "You girls must be starving," she said. She moved toward the refrigerator. "We have plenty of food here, or we can get takeout. Whatever you want, we can do it." She turned to regard them nervously. In a strange way, her parents' awkward behavior was soothing to Max. It just felt sort of reassuring that they had no idea how to handle this either. Unsurprisingly, neither of them had been terribly hungry recently, but it didn't seem like they should pass up a nice meal while they had the chance. And now that it had been mentioned, Max did feel a bit peckish. After a bit of drawn-out conversation, Vanessa set to work on making them dinner. "Chloe," Ryan said, clearing his throat. She looked up at him, pulling her aimless stare away from the table. You've really grown up." He shook his head, somehow managing to conjure a little smile. "You've changed a bit since I last saw you." "A bit," Vanessa laughed, highlighting the understating in his words. She stopped what she was doing and placed a hand on Chloe's shoulder. "I always knew you'd grow into a beautiful woman. I have a good eye for those things." Chloe chuckled quietly and bowed her head in embarrassment. "Thanks, Mrs. Caulfield," she said. "Oh," Vanessa waved her hand, "you can call me Vanessa. It's fine." At Chloe's nod in agreement, she went back to preparing the food. Another breeze of silence entered the room. Ryan twisted his wedding band around on his finger, audibly swallowing every so often. Max thought there might as well be a literal elephant sitting at the empty spot at the table, glaring at each of them in offense for not being acknowledged. She didn't exactly envy their position. How were they supposed to breach a topic so massive? "Girls, I don't." Ryan rubbed his forehead with a sigh. "I don't know where to begin with all of this. I've watched every report, but it seems like no one has a good answer for what's happening. First Arcadia Bay, then those other two towns. I know in your last call you mentioned being near one of them. We're so lucky you're both okay." "Okay." The word, in all of its wonderful varieties, was quickly losing all meaning. It was just a sound. A noise that meant, "I can't think of anything to say, but let's stay positive." There was something bitterly humorous in how, if taken out of context, the past month had been reviewed with such a chipper attitude. Thousands of people dead. It's okay. Chloe losing her mother and stepfather. That's okay. An uncertain future constantly running from the cosmos that want nothing more than to kill your best friend. We'll be okay. Chloe, Ryan continued, trying to keep cool, "I can't imagine dash." "Pop," Max interrupted. He looked at her only for a moment, then weakly nodded. "Okay," he said, the tension releasing in his shoulders. How's the food coming?" he asked, shifting his attention to Vanessa. "Should be done any minute," she replied, her voice sounding thin. Ryan bowed his head and began fidgeted with his ring again. Max could imagine the elephant doubly frustrated now that someone had almost addressed it before changing their mind. The air felt so tight. "Awesome," Chloe said, forcing a sliver of enthusiasm into her voice before the quiet could truly settle in again. I'm hella hungry." Though she had only been gone a few months, her bedroom felt strangely alien to her. It was the opposite of what she had expected. Everything about Seattle had always felt a little distant, like she was only visiting rather than living there. Everything but her room, which had become her safe haven. Now it was everything else that had provided a sense of comfort, however small it may be, while her room felt like it had belonged to someone else. And maybe, after everything she'd been through, it sort of did. She couldn't help but notice the various things missing that she had taken with her to Blackwell. Things that were now property of the ruins of Arcadia Bay. "So, this is where you were for 5 years," Chloe said, slowly scanning the room as she sat at the foot of Max's bed. Though she knew Chloe probably didn't mean it, she could hear the bitterness in her voice. "It's nice." That sounded much better. "Thanks," Max said quietly, drifting over to the empty wall where her photo collage once was. She realized how much she would have liked Chloe to see her room at school. Maybe she'd get a kick out of all the photographs. Be impressed or something. "So, have you thought of how we're going to get out of this?" Chloe asked. "Nothing solid," Max admitted, still looking around. "We need a good reason. Something believable. And then once we're away, we can play it by ear." She turned to face Chloe. "Do you have any ideas?" Chloe rocked her head back and forth, then sighed. My dad had a brother," she said. "Honestly, I haven't heard from him in years. But maybe we could, I don't know, say we need to check in with him." She closed her eyes and seemed to be trying to coerce the next words out of her mouth. "He's like, the only family I have left, so it'd make sense for him to want to make sure I'm safe." She flitted a hand. "Probably, right? That does make sense." It was actually the perfect excuse. Chloe came with Max to see her parents, so she assumed they would find it fair that she accompanied Chloe to see her uncle. It also gave them a bit of wiggle room as to why she wouldn't be immediately returning. Surely her parents would want details, but they could talk themselves around that. The only thing was, Max felt awful about using the loss of Joyce as an excuse. She guessed that if they were really going to go through with this lifestyle, they would have to start loosening their moral integrity, but it still made her stomach turn. "It does," Max finally said. In response, Chloe just nodded. "I guess we can bring it up tomorrow. Say he's been in touch and try to get out of here either tomorrow night or the next morning." She rubbed her temple. "We're not out of the woods yet. We're going to need to be very convincing, but it's definitely a start." Max clasped her elbow and shifted her feet. "I'm sorry, Chloe." "It's cool," she responded. She elongated the word awkwardly as she patted her knees, "I'm pretty fucking tired. Are you okay to call it a night or?" Yeah, okay," Max said. She suddenly became self-conscious of the fact that there was only one bed. Sure, she and Chloe had shared a bed around a month ago, and it did lead to them kissing, but things were different now. Since the storm, they had always gotten 2 beds at the motels where they stayed. Though, if it bothered Chloe at all, she didn't show it as she slipped herself under the covers without hesitation. Max turned out the light and joined her. "Good night," she said in a whisper. "Night," Chloe replied. As they laid in bed, she thought of a million things. The constant feeling of guilt grew louder in the silence, creeping along her mind slowly and thoroughly. The storms shaking and stumbling through the towns. But when she felt Chloe's foot graze her leg as she turned onto her side, another anxious feeling began brewing her stomach. Because then she could only think of why she had chosen her.